All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Believe in Bills. Adam Benigni of WGRZ TV, as always, and Sports Talk Live Buffalo, and Sal Maiorana, the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Sal, the 2025 NFL Draft is now in the books. How are you holding up on this Sunday as we record this?
That's a long 3 days, Adam. You've been in that room plenty of times to know it's,
Yeah.
it's kind of a relentless 3 days of work, especially yesterday because there's so many picks coming. They ended up making six picks yesterday plus a
Mhm.
trade. It was rapid fire, especially when you're trying to find information on some of these guys and you have to write like I do a story immediately after the guy's pick. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm always glad when the 3 days are over and now we can look back and see just what the hell they did because when you're in the moment, sometimes you lose perspective on what exactly is going on over there.
Yeah. But even as immersed in the moment as I'm sure you were and the others who were there, and I have been through the years in my time covering this thing, it was pretty obvious to see the overarching theme behind
Yeah.
this particular draft. I mean, it's been stating the obvious, but that the defense needed to upgrade based on recent results, most recently the AFC Championship game loss out of the Kansas City Chiefs and what the shortcomings were on this football team. And they addressed the defense in a very significant way in this draft.
They did. I mean, he made no bones about it. They came out the first five picks they made ended up being on the defense. And the ones that you really pay attention to, like all fans too, are those first 2 days when they had to pick. And you and I had talked about this too, how they didn't have room to screw around here. They had three picks on those first 2 days. Originally, they had two second-round picks, and they needed to address the needs, which were so obvious: cornerback, defensive tackle, edge rusher, right then and there. Don't he'll always say, and he said Saturday night, oh, it was always best player available, and I'm not buying it. Best
No,
player available could have been a safety at that point, and if that was truly the case, then he did the right thing by not picking the safety and picking whoever it might have been, whether it was the first, second, or third pick. They had to address those needs at the top, get the best possible players that, for obvious reasons, are being picked in those spots. So I like that he did that. He stuck to this, what should have been the script going in. And
mm-hmm.
then when we got to Saturday, he was able to do whatever the hell he wanted. And that's kind of how it played out. So I thought their strategy was dead on perfect.
Yeah.
We had the order mixed up. I was thinking maybe D-tap the corner. It ended up being the other way around. So the first 2 rounds or first 3 rounds we could talk about first, and then we can get into the
Yeah.
rest of it if you like.
It cracks me up, right? Because through the years, the whole best player available. I mean, don't you think that's just draft hocus pocus, like intended more for the other teams that are picking around him than what I've always said? It is best player available within the areas of need.
Yeah.
That's always how I've sort of tried to predict and analyze, and not always, but far more often than not, it winds up happening that way. And this draft was a crystal clear example of that. I feel like, given some of the dynamics and what went on ahead of the Bills at 30, that Max Hairston, the cornerback they chose with the 30th pick, was kind of there. They didn't know he was going to be there, but once he was, and I guess Bean claims he had a first-round grade on this guy. He does bring a lot of talent, speed, a little bit undersized, but there's a lot to like about this guy.
Yeah, I mean, look, it turned out that the only two cornerbacks drafted ahead of him were Travis Hunter, who is a two-way player. He's going to play probably receiver, maybe as much as cornerback. So the only true full-time cornerback that went in front of him was Jahdae Barron of Texas. He went to the Broncos at number 20. That was actually the guy that I thought would have been the perfect fit for the Bills, but I also didn't think he was ever getting down to that range. So when you look at Hairston, there was Trey Amos was supposed to be in that category. Will Johnson was already supposed to be gone. We didn't really realize that the knee injury pushed him down to the middle of the second round, as it turned out. So they ended up getting really the second cornerback, true cornerback, in the draft. And I think Hairston had been projected right around that area. So it wasn't like being reached. I think I even wrote that this morning for my column. I said, I think he was the perfect pick. When you consider value, where he ended up getting picked, and the need that he obviously, hopefully, will fill here in Buffalo, I think that was a home run of a pick. So let's hope the kid can play. We thought Kyrie Elam was going to be a home run pick too, and that sure didn't work out. So hopefully Harrison can come in and win a job right away.
Yeah, so I mean, I like the way they've addressed that position opposite Christian Benford, right? I mean, you have the veteran support in Tre'Davious White and Dane Jackson, and now you have the future occupant of that spot. They hope, and perhaps sooner rather than later, given a lot of the talent that he brings to the table. We don't have
I
to
mean,
go into. Go ahead,
I,
Sal.
I
I'm
was I
sorry.
was going to say, I mean, on his Zoom call, he did say that he bumped up to about 192. I think he
Hmm.
said. So if that's the case, because we asked Bean about that, I think on Friday then, because he had Zoomed on Thursday. And he said, yeah, that's true. And they think he can carry the weight. So he ran that 4.28. I'm assuming he ran that when he was about, 183, 185 at the combine. Since then, if he's put on 9 pounds and can still run like that, that's certainly going to help as far as, when we talk about going in and tackling. I think we addressed that in the last episode. He appears to be a willing tackler. If he has 10 more pounds on him, that'll help.
All right. So we had addressed the top three picks in our previous show, and that's not to suggest that everyone has listened to that or whatever. So I want to, but what I want to do here, so as to not necessarily be totally repetitive, and with the benefit of a little bit of hindsight, now that this thing is behind us, is maybe lump the next three picks together, right, including Deion Walker. All right. So now you see second round TJ Sanders, defensive tackle, South Carolina, 6'4", 297 was what he was listed at, and they'll bring that number up, obviously, too. Landon Jackson, edge rusher, third round, Arkansas, a player with a lot of talent and who kind of fits the bill and historically what they've looked for in that position. We thought they might go edge rusher, and they do. And then in the fourth round, Deion Walker out of Kentucky, 6'7", 331 is the listing on him.
Yeah.
There now, there's an issue, a back injury he's coming back from, but there's the girth we talked about, right?
Yep.
That they needed, and they wind up addressing that in the fourth round. So I guess you could lump those next three picks together, and the focus clearly on defensive line, which was another area of need, which has been a point we've been making.
Yeah, and absolutely. The Jackson pick, I think, might be the best of those three. I think the value in the third round is tremendous. That was a kid who a lot of people thought would be a second round pick, maybe even middle of the second round. So to get him, and that's because of the trade they made with the Bears. They went up to get TJ Sanders, but in the return, they got the Bears' third round pick, which I think was the eighth one of the third round. So it was high enough where they could still get Landon Jackson. I think that's going to be a great pick. He fits the bill for what the Bills are looking for in an edge rusher. I even joked with Bean yesterday. I mean, you got a hell of a basketball team on that defensive line. I mean, he's got three edge rushers now who are 6'6". Deion Walker, we'll get to him in a second. He's 6'7". So, and I asked Bean about it, and we laughed first, and then he said, "But yeah, if a skill set is similar, we are always going to take the bigger, longer athlete because there's just more to work with." So I think Jackson is going to be the perfect fit. Now, the Walker pick, Adam, that makes the Sanders pick make sense because you and
Right.
I both said we had hoped the Bills were going to add a big body at the one tech spot, and Sanders does not fit that criteria. He's, like you said, 297. I've also seen 305 on him. So whatever the range is, he's right around 300. When they picked him, if that was the only guy they were going to pick, then you wonder, okay, they still don't have a true one tech behind Daquan Jones. And Bean said, we don't really necessarily break it up the way you guys do. I mean, we think a guy can play. We think a guy can play both spots typically. Well, one techniques are one techniques for a reason. They do one thing. They plug the middle of the line and take on two blockers. TJ Sanders was not going to be that guy, and we know Ed Oliver is. When they made the Walker pick, then it made sense.
Right.
Because then now you realize now they got the guy, and he weighs 345. According to Walker on his Zoom call, he said he actually played at 345. So maybe he lost a little bit of weight in the offseason, but he will be able to get back up into that range, and that ends up making him the biggest one tech that was available in the draft. So if the kid can play, and there's a little bit of room for wonder about that. He had a really good 2023.
Hmm.
suffered the back injury, and a lot of the draft analysts noticed there was a big difference in the way he played. And one of the knocks on him was that his lower half really wasn't maybe as strong as you would think for a man his size. He can move well, but he may not have had that anchor, that strength in his anchor to be a truly, stud guy in the middle. So that's something we're going to have to watch if the Bills can develop that when they get him in here. But a man that size, if they can get what the projection on him was, that's a hell of a pick, because now you've got your two guys not only that you move into the future with, but who could step right in this year and play significant roles on the D line.
Yeah, right. And again, it changes, as you said, getting him in the fourth round changes the complexion of everything that happened ahead of it. Well, there was a lot to like about it to begin with,
Yeah,
but now you have a building block to sort of fill that particular dynamic and philosophy of defensive football that the Bills have lacked, and now they've addressed that. So looking at the rest of the picks, we don't have to necessarily go through. I think there's some interesting aspects to this, and I'll just kind of throw them out there. And you've been in the room and asking questions, and I'm interested in your takes and insight. The value they're placing on the cornerback position, which, I mean, it goes back to, and it's a common cliche in football that a lot of GM, but the late John Butler, he was on our old Sports Extra show on Sunday nights. He would come in and we'd have a lot of discussions both on and off the air with him. And he would always look at you and just kind of say, you can never have enough corners.
Yep.
I use that as one of my that philosophy is kind of at play here.
I use that as one of my little headlines in my story today when I recap the draft. You can never have enough, especially in today's game. I mean, John was talking about that 25 years ago. The game has changed in 25 years. Now you've got 5 guys in the pattern all the time in the NFL. So you've got to have guys who can cover, and the Bills are making sure that they're covered at that spot. Trey White and Dane Jackson coming in to provide that veteran backup and leadership. And Trey White might end up winning the starting job. Who knows if Harrison's not quite ready. And
Sure.
now you're also thinking about the future. Harrison is going to be on the team, and hopefully he's here for a long time. You back it up with a guy like Hancock, Jordan Hancock.
Yep.
That kid played, and Bean mentioned this too. That kid played a lot of big games at Ohio State. I mean, he was there. I think he was a 4-year starter for them. That's a big time program. Just won the national championship. He's not going to be overwhelmed when he gets to the NFL. He's been in big spotlights before. So you hope that he can come in and win a backup job. He's going to play special teams at the start for sure. They've got Benford locked up for 4 years, and Hairston hopefully will be there for at least 5. But you need guys in the back. Dane Jackson and Trey White are on 1-year deals. I don't think they'll be back in 26. So good for the Bills for picking him. Again, you hope the kid can play. He's a 5th-round pick, so you never know what you're quite getting there. But the Bills have had some good luck at him in the 5th round in these recent drafts, so maybe this is the next guy.
Well, you mentioned Benford. They've had some good luck in the 6th round,
too.
Round.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so the footnote I would add to the points you just made, Dorian Strong, who they took in the 6th round, he's, based on what I've learned about him, pretty versatile, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's got zone coverage skills. There's a lot of talk about him having the potential to play at nickel or even perhaps transition to safety.
Yeah.
Right. So I think in addition to adding numbers at the position, the Bills there's a clear effort to provide some flexibility and versatility for the future here as well, which is what you like to do to accent a philosophy in these late round picks.
I think he played primarily nickel. I think most of his career. I think he played a little bit of boundary, but he was more known as a nickel corner. And look, the Bills are going to need a backup there, right? Taron Johnson is their stud nickel corner, but they've had to use, Cam Lewis is a nice player, a UB kid. We all like that. But he's, you would like to be a little bit better at backup nickel corner than Cam Lewis. I mean, Cam Lewis actually is better off being a backup safety, if you really want to know the truth, I think. So they do need someone who can move inside and play nickel if Taron Johnson gets hurt, and Taron Johnson has, in his past, had some health problems. So if this kid can come in, again, special teams will be a huge part of this. I like that pick for that reason alone, that maybe he can earn a spot. I don't know if he has kick return ability. I forgot. I don't even know if I looked that up. Because it would be nice to find if one of these kids could do that. And when we talked about they should draft a running back, and maybe that's a way to get on the field. This would be a kick returner. I
Yeah.
don't know if Dorian Strong has done it before, but it's that's why they drafted Daquan Hardy last year in the 6th round, and he turned out that he really wasn't cut out to be the return man, at least in training camp, and never played last year for the Bills, practice squad guy. So maybe Strong can move in and take that spot.
All right. So 3 other players to potentially talk about here, and we don't have to necessarily go into them. The other 5th rounder, Jackson Hawes, a blocking tight end.
Yep.
Georgia Tech is an interesting player, and you had projected they would address the offensive line, and they also did. They did that in the 6th round. Also,
Yeah. The tight end played at Yale. Actually, his first 2 years he missed. He was a red shirt the first year, then the COVID year. So then he played, I think, 3 years at Yale, and then 1 at Georgia Tech. So he stepped up. He transferred, stepped up into a bigger, better conference, obviously in the ACC. Now, what I've read about him is that he is not a pass receiver.
no.
I think he caught like 25% of the passes thrown to him. He was not a good ball catcher at all, but he is a hulk of a blocker, and that's what caught Bean's eye. Bean said yesterday that the tape that he saw, he watched the Georgia Tech game, as a matter of fact, the rivalry game, and Hawes was jumping off the page or off the screen, I should say, because of his blocking. It wasn't because he was catching passes; he was just killing people. So the Bills don't have that on their team right now. They didn't have it when Quentin Morris was here. He wasn't exactly a stud blocker either. So you've got Knox and Kincaid, obviously, as your top 2 guys. And if Hawes were to make the team, now you've got a guy who can bring in a running situation instead of Dawson Knox or Kincaid. One of those guys might be on the field, but take the other one off and put this kid in. Zach Davidson is on the team still, but he's not that player either. Zach Davidson is a pass catching tight end who has had some opportunities in the NFL with the Vikings, with the Bills, and he just really hasn't shown out too well. So if this kid can actually come in and be like a 6th offensive lineman, that's another thing too. With all those 6-man offensive lines they used last year, how about actually making a tight end do that, who then can present the threat of being a potential target? Maybe that's what they're thinking of here with this kid Hawes.
Interesting stuff as we continue to break down this draft and will in the coming days. Sal Maiorana, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. I'm Adam Benigni of WGRZ TV. And, diamonds in the rough. It's what you look for on day 3. There's some interesting aspects as we've discussed to who they did draft. But again, clear emphasis on defense, which is what all the projections were for this. And, the grades now don't matter much. You got to wait. Yeah. This one, I think, the last point here, you've got to ultimately wait. Any GM would tell you 3 years, right? And there's logic to that. Sometimes I think that's them buying themselves a little time or whatever.
But I think that timeline has shrunk, though.
That shrunk.
I think that used to be the case, not anymore.
Well, here's the thing, and especially given Bean's history near the top of the draft.
Yeah.
You need more early impact and high impact results early in their career and as they move on, right? And you hope that who they've selected up here, there's some, it's not heat, but there are some eyes on him for those results to show themselves sooner rather than later. And in a Super Bowl window, that's something that they need to be able to rely and depend on, right?
I mean, Hairston has to come in and be a starter. I mean, that's your 1st round pick. That's an obvious area of need. And, we can talk about, they brought in Shway Wright and Dane Jackson. That's fine. But those guys are on the other end of their career. They're depth options. They're guys that are, break glass in case of emergency. If Max Hairston can't play, they need Hairston to come right in and be, you don't have to be a stud right away, but be able to hold down that side of the field like a 1st round pick is supposed to. That's undeniable. That's got to happen this year for the Bills. The other 2 guys, then you get into the defensive line, you're talking rotation. There's not quite as much pressure on those guys because they're sharing roles. The quarterback's out there for 100%. You got starting corners, they don't come off the field. So that's going to be a big fight for Max Hairston to take. The defensive linemen, you can work them in more gradually. And they've also got some guys here already. Dwayne Carter, you hope you're going to get more out of him in year two. And Oliver and Daquan Jones are still your starters. And on the edge, you brought in Joey Bosa. There's no pressure on Landon Jackson to come right in and be a 15 sack guy. He's got some time. They need it from Hairston. There's a lot of heat on that kid. A lot of eyeballs are going to be on him, and that's where this draft, fairly or not, will be judged because we just have the memory of Elam, right, still hanging.
Right.
He just whiffed on a corner 3 years ago, and he can't whiff on another one.
Nope, can't afford to. With so much at stake in terms of this team's potential and what they're truly in competition for, and that is the elusive Super Bowl title. All right, that's going to do it for now. But we'll be back next week. And now we're into the off-season program, right, Sal?
Yes.
So there's going to be news and analysis. And just a point to our followers, thank you for listening, for following, for checking us out in whatever form, whether it's audio or video on YouTube or on Sal's articles in the Democrat and Chronicle. But we're going to be continuing this show right on through the off-season and into training camp. So thanks very much, Sal. It's been a pleasure and looking forward to that.
All right, we've got, I think the next thing up is rookie minicamp, Adam, and I think it's May 9th they start that. So nothing really is happening. It used to be they went right to rookie minicamp right after the draft. And I think a lot of teams realize that kids are graduating at that time. So I think a lot of teams have pushed that back. So there's going to be a little bit of a dead period here, really, for about 2 weeks until rookie minicamp. And then the OTAs get going because they're still in the voluntary workout phase where nothing happens at all. Nothing's on the field, in fact.
Right.
So that's going to be starting in about 2 weeks.
All right. And we'll be there with shows and takes and some interesting guests as well. I love doing that too. Once the draft, whether it's for television or podcast or whatever it is, once the draft happens and you see who they've selected, to kind of go into those markets where and talk to people who've actually covered these guys and get some really good insight. I think this is a great forum, kind of long form for that. So that's among the things we'll be working on here on Believe. On Bill. So enjoy some much needed downtime the rest of your weekend and your Sunday here, Sal. Don't do a thing.
Oh, yeah, sure. I have to go to the Amerks game in an hour.
Well,
Amerks game 2 down at the arena in Rochester against Syracuse. There is no rest for the weary in Rochester.
No, there isn't.
So I'll be down at the arena today. They won game 1 the other night. It's fun too because the Sabres sent some guys down, right? League's down here now. So this team, this was a really good team during the regular season, and now they've got some reinforcements from Buffalo. So not that I'm rooting for a long playoff run because I would like some time off, but this team might have a chance at them to do something in these Calder Cup playoffs. So we'll see here.
And it's good. We've seen it in the past that hopefully now it hasn't. That I'm talking going back to, the Drury Briere era. Well, really, those guys I'm not mentioning as former, but a guy like Ryan Miller, Vanek, those guys post lockout. We saw how that experience translated to results that have obviously been elusive for that franchise in the NHL. But perhaps this is a step in that direction. In any case, we digress. We'll look for your coverage in the DNC, and we'll talk to you maybe next week here on Believe in Bills. All right, so
take care.
All right, thanks everyone for being with us, and we'll see you down the road here real soon.